Hello, and welcome to Making Sense of It. This program is our gift to you from the Glasser Institute for Choice Theory, where each week we have a member of the Glasser Institute to come on and explain to us how they use the concepts of reality therapy, choice theory, and lead management into making their lives so fulfilling as well as helping others. And our speaker today is a favorite, and that is Gloria Cisse, and her topic is choosing peace. And let me just give you the intro. In this brief introduction, participants will learn how to use choice theory and reality therapy to address interpersonal violence and can possibly impact the outcome for individuals as well as communities. And those of you that are watching live today, after Gloria does her talk, we will close out the meeting and then we'll have time to ask questions and for additional dialogue. So thank each of you for being here and welcome, Gloria.
Thank you. Welcome, Mon. Thank you, Mona, for offering me this opportunity. I really like talking to people about the different ways to use choice theory and reality therapy. And I have been doing work in with actually I've done work with in domestic violence shelters for about 30 years, but informally, I have been involved in domestic violence work or eradicating or reducing the likelihood that people will use violence in their interpersonal relationships for almost 40 years now. And but when I got trained in CTRT and I started using it, it became extremely abundantly clear that people are making choices, right? They're making choices about the behaviors that they use. And what we need to do is think about how we can increase people's choices so that they are less inclined to use violence in their relationships, in their interpersonal relationships. So, as I said, this is a PowerPoint I've got to do some work on. It's a little, I mean, it's old. I haven't looked at it much. But one of Glasser's quotes that I use a lot, but I think it's really relevant here, is that all long-lasting psychological problems are relationship problems. And as I said earlier, as I have worked with people who have committed offenses over whether they're violent uh, offenses that include physical violence or psychological violence or sexual violence. Working with these people has really helped me to understand that all psychological problems are relationship problems. Now, we don't uh, do counseling or therapy with people who have been convicted of a family violence crime, which makes it even more important that we can teach folks in this process how to use choice theory in their lives. I tell people all the time, I may not be able to teach folks how to use reality therapy techniques, although we use them in almost everything we do. But I can teach everybody choice theory. And the idea is that people then take and fold those concepts into their everyday lives and use them to avoid violence. Actually, to increase their choices and to engage in relationships that don't include violence. The I remember doing some research on a presentation I was doing for a school system here around children with problematic sexual behaviors, and it turns out that interpersonal violence is connected to community violence, is connected to child abuse, is connected to children's problematic sexual behaviors, sexual abuse, assault, mental illness, and on and on. And I know that all of us are familiar with the ACEs study that was done by Felitti and his group out of Kaiser Permanente. But here we go. All long lasting psychological problems are relationship problems. Glasser hit it on the nail, hit that nail on the head. So as I said, this is a kind of bland um, um, PowerPoint, but there are So many, and actually, the when we talk about the majority of the family violence incidents occur where a man perpetrates violence against a woman. So the man in relationships is the um, primary aggressor. And I'm gonna even before I move through this, I really am going to tell you that I prefer, because the CDC prefers that we use IPV as opposed to family violence, especially, because it creates a common language around how we do research and we talk about family violence. So this is here, it says family violence, but I'm really thinking domestic violence, family violence, interpersonal violence, however we call it. But again, I prefer, and I'm going to, if I didn't anywhere else in this presentation, I will be kind of mixing those terms, but really focusing on trying to shift the language to interpersonal violence, IPV. And so there are quite a few factors that influence family violence, like sometimes growing up in a community or a family where there's a lot of violence, or being excessive use of substances, or stress. But those things do not cause family violence. Family violence is a choice, right? If a person um, is exposed to a situation, or is stressed out, or even uh, intoxicated, it doesn't make them commit violence against their significant other. I actually have two workbooks that I have written. One is for men, specifically for men, and the other is for women. But teaching using this model works for anybody. But all of you may or may not be familiar with, the multiple uses, or places where we can teach people choice theory and help them to choice theory, reality theory, belief management, and help people to learn how to have relationships that are more need satisfying. And when they're need satisfying, the likelihood of using violence is decreased, because we're not using any of those external control psychology terms to do it. And so I don't know if any of you are familiar with Brian Stevenson, but he runs a program over in Alabama. And of course, I can't remember it now, but he's written a book, and his book became a movie. It's called Just Mercy. And recently, my daughter and her husband and their 8 kids and I went to Montgomery to that museum, and I bought a few things. I've read the book, I've seen the movie, but I bought some things, and this quote stood out to me, and it says that we are all more than the worst thing that we've ever done. So when we are facilitating classes or learning or whatever with people who have perpetrated a family violence crime, or an interpersonal violence crime, whether it's physical violence or sexual violence. Oh gosh, got to work on this language. Um, we still see people as people who need the best care imaginable. And so, therefore, in order to reduce the likelihood that we are going to be judging, and to help us to be able to suspend judgment, we are going to see them and understand that we're all like humans, right? And we're all more than the worst thing that we've ever done. So in the in our program, as I said, I've created these workbooks, but I also do training with the folks that work with us, and we talk about that creating an environment conducive to change. And Wobblings has a little card that he distributes when he does his training, but they're also included in his book, where we are where it talks about those things that a person who is implementing um, who's using reality therapy or choice theory, lead management, or whatever is it does when they are creating an environment that's conducive to change. And this program, I extrapolated. I took out some of the things we don't talk about the whole list of 27 things, but we do. Make sure to clearly say to people that this is not therapy, because in Georgia we are not allowed to do therapy when a person's been convicted of a family violence crime, because it is not because of a mental illness. It is because, remember, I listed those factors, a few factors versus causes. And so mental illness is not the cause of family violence. So we are reducing the likelihood of people, or we don't accept excuses. So, and we do that by being absolutely clear up front about who we are and what we do. Another reason this model is absolutely perfect for working with people who have committed interpersonal violence is that all those cognitive distortions that people come to a group with, we kind of stop them at the door. Doesn't mean that people don't use them. It doesn't mean that we don't have to talk about them extensively. But excuses is gonna have to leave those out. We also don't allow victim blaming and a whole bunch of other things. So we set very clear boundaries. Very clear boundaries. We are constantly working on ourselves to make sure that we are as aware as possible. We so that we can be sure of or aware of our own biases that might get in the way of us doing the best work we can do, so that we can suspend judgment. We tell people up front, no excuses. We don't take excuses. And folks come with lots of excuses. We're always firm, fair, and friendly. Not friends with, but friendly, right? We're always firm, fair, and friendly. We practice a lot of active listening skills, um, because there is always a story. I really I pride myself on calling myself a story catching change agent. So everybody who comes to us tells their story, because even though the past, we can't go back in the past and change anything. The past is very important in making us, or having us um, be the people that we are. So I love the stories. So we spend a lot of time listening to the people. And in this program, there is a requirement for a 10-page autobiography. So even if we don't have an hour and a half that we can just commit to listening to the story, we hear the story in group. And so 2 weeks after a person has been accepted into our program and begins uh, participation, they're required to submit their autobiography, which is very specific. It's about how you learn to have relationships, how you learn to use violence in relationship, those kinds of things. We teach people reflective listening skills, and that basically means that we are practicing self evaluation. We talk to folks in our groups about self evaluation and the importance of self evaluation. If you're not aware of your own biases, if you're not aware of the cognitive distortions that you use, or that have you've used so much that they become your beliefs, then how can you correct those things, right? How can you move to the next place? So we began our program after we've done the interview, we've done all the paperwork, got all the consents and all that good stuff signed. We start the workbook out with an explanation of choice theory and reality therapy. We tell people why we believe that it's important to this work, because even though the contemporary, or the excuse me the thinking is in the world of individuals who do family violence intervention work across the country, is that the primary issue is that of power and control. It is a lot about power and control. But I've surveyed many of the people that are in our program, and oftentimes what they're trying to do is figure out how to be connected to the other person. They want to stay with that person. They're just not using effective need satisfying behaviors. They use more of those disconnecting behaviors than they do connecting behaviors. So we've listened to that, and again, I have to say, it just seems like they're, if not, actually, I surveyed a group the other night, and asked them what need they believe they were trying to meet with their behavior that got them into trouble. And 7 out of 8 of them, because we're only allowed to have 8 people per group, but 7 out of 8 of them said love and belonging, which I wasn't really surprised by, but I was kind of excited to just kind of keep hearing them say that. One person said power, because that person had a really high need for power, and recognized that he was using those behaviors in his relationship. But the others were uh, trying to stay connected. They just didn't know how to use those connecting habits to stay remain connected in the relationship. So when we talk about the fact that we're always making choices, and what you have to do is think about increase your choices, right? So we do these little exercises where you think about the choice that you have, or how many choices can you make, and we come up with other ways. I teach them this, and I might be getting ahead of myself, but we teach them a lot of ways to think about additional choices that they can make, so that they are choosing behaviors, adding behaviors to their suitcase of behavior that are need satisfying, that doesn't cause them harm or the other person. We are really big on the only person's behavior you can control is your own, and that behavior is total, right? And so they are responsible for their total behavior. We say taking responsibility means that you are taking responsibility for your total behavior, and not just saying I'm sorry, or I did, or admitting that you did something, but admitting that you caused harm to another, because that's really important in this work. People think I came and I went to court and I said, yes, I did it, I pled guilty, da 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 da. But pleading or taking responsibility or saying that you did something, and I have sat with so many people, men primarily, who will say, "Yep, I did it," and then they've got all kinds of justifications, rationalizations, minimizations, whatever going on. So therefore, they have not taken responsibility for the harm they caused the other person. And so in our program, it is imperative that people take full responsibility for their total behavior. Oh, and so these are a couple of the some of the things. Every week we do a review. Every week we do a review. We focus, and so we have a list of things that interventions that we teach. That the expectation is that um, people will start to replace their old behaviors with these new behaviors, and we focus more on the connecting habits than the disconnecting habits, because we want to draw people's attention to the things that we want them to do, as opposed to the things that they have done, right? So in the beginning, we talk about how many times did you criticize, how many times did you blame. We go through the whole list of the disconnecting habits, but then we talk about the connecting habits. And what I find, because we work with people who have very differing educational levels and comprehension levels, and so I've created some videos that we show that, for around certain things that people can watch. And because like I said, reading comprehension is could be an issue, and so we just kind of accommodate those kinds of things. But the antlers you see here is an acronym for the connecting habits. And so I was having a hard time remembering the connecting habits, and some of the others were. And I asked some of the people who were in our classes, and I asked my one of my daughters, my youngest daughter, to help me to come up with a way to do this. And so she found this. She found antler. She put the words in the computer somewhere, some program, and so it's much easier for me to remember them, and it's much easier for the people in our group to remember them. So it's y'all know what they are. accepting, negotiating differences, trusting, listening, encouraging, respecting, and supporting. And they, they remember them and they think about, they talk about the antlers, right? The other thing we do is we have people to label, right? Draw an image of your hand on a piece of paper, and then write the basic needs on the paper. So you got thumb, pointer finger is power, that finger is freedom, love and belonging because that's where the wedding ring goes. Pinky finger is fun. It's the smallest finger, but it's necessary, right, to this whole hand. When we use this, the pause is another intervention that we use, and it stands for well, the P is pull back and breathe. The A is activate your new learning. No, activate your inner strength. The U, use your new learning. The S, save the relationship and keep your freedom. And the E is evaluate your options. So all too often people believe that they only have one choice, which is to hit someone. And that is not true. Or call someone names or withhold affection or um, keep people, not let people have access to money or any of those things, but that's not true. So we help people to evaluate their options and increase their options. Every week we do a review. All of the content in the workbook, throughout the workbook, I just kind of extrapolated like key pieces, and the group leads the review. Is that it? That's it. That's all I have for y'all today. And that.
Okay,
So do you
very good.
have any
Thank you,
questions?
thank you, thank you.
Okay.
So I have, while we're still recording, have a couple things here that you talked about the bias.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That often people use force to try to stay connected.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you're teaching them to what? To let go of that negative force?
Well, sometimes it's hard to let go of the negative force, but the idea is to help people to understand what you're trying to do is stay connected to the other person. And so and when I asked, so how did that help you when you did the behavior that got you here? How did it help you stay close to the person that you were trying to be close to? And they began to understand that. So what can we do differently? So we got box breathing. So you can do box breathing before you get to here, or you can do 5 minutes of meditation, or you can start to um, and so we teach them these techniques, and then we have them practice them every day so that they become organized behaviors, right? And so when there is not, I hesitate to use the word trigger, but when something happens in the real world
Mhm.
and it
That's
makes its way to their quality world, then they have that frustration signal. Instead of going to the suitcase of behaviors and pulling out that punching someone or hitting, then they have a new behavior that's replaced the old one, and that's either box breathing or leaving, using the solving circle, or leaving the room, or yeah.
so what is that
So we
box
that's
breathing?
what you can do. Okay, so box breathing is a technique that they use it a lot in the military, but it's a method where you visualize a square box, and on one end you inhale to the count of 4 or 5. And so we usually do 4. So we inhale to 4, and you visualize going up the side of the box, and then across the top you're going to hold your breath to the count of 4, and you come down the other side of the when you get to the other side, you're going to exhale to the count of 4, and then across the bottom you hold for the count of 4. It's a really, really effective technique.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right, right. Well, I'm familiar with the holding of the 4 and the releasing of the 4 and so forth, but that is really putting total behavior together because you're seeing
Mm-hmm.
it as well as implementing it.
That's
Yeah,
right.
so I
That's
like
right.
that, that they can visually see it as well as feel it internally. That's great.
Mhm.
And then you've made the comment that biases become beliefs.
Mhm. Your cognitive distortions lead to belief.
And how are some of the ways you go about helping a person see what areas in which they are biased?
So we do we really focus more on because people are very hesitant to challenge their current belief system, right? They're very hesitant because those beliefs are rooted in their history, right? They're
Right.
rooted in they either got it from great grandparents or grandparents or something they learned, from mom and dad, but they really hold on to those things. So what we do is we use a another visual technique where we identify the we draw another triangle and we put the four parts of total behavior around the triangle and we have them to unpack the suitcase, right? And we unpack the suitcase to the point that we get to the core of what caused them to misbehave, right? And usually it's hurt or disrespect or um, feeling devalued or any number of things, but then they've identified several thoughts that they had that led to those, and so then we repeg the suitcase with reframes, right?
Mm,
As opposed to like saying, oh, you have this bias. Now we might call out a cognitive distortion, right? But rather than do that, because that gets people's guard up, so rather than do those kinds of things, we just use these techniques to help them to get to where they can see the value in something versus, first we got to get past the cringe, right?
mhm,
First, because
mhm.
once you get your guard up, then I got to work to get it back down. But if I talk to you about something that seems innocuous or like it's not a big deal, then it's different. We're just doing an activity. It's different, right?
Right. So you have them to unpack and then
And then
repack.
repack.
But then
We
repacking is
repack
reframing.
as reframing. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And then about the responsibility that eventually they'll say, yeah, I'm responsible. And it's a yeah, but I'm responsible, but this was the causal factor behind it. And you
That's
help
right. And
them
then
to,
we can't deal with that. You don't. No, no, no. Nothing caused you. The only person who can control your behavior, your total behavior, is you.
right.
So you got to do it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
And
yeah.
language is very important too. We're really, really, really um, clear about the language that people use. um, because if you're not thinking about the language, I tell them all the time, the words you use are a glimpse into the way you think,
Hmm.
and I'm listening to the words you use, and because we listen for change language, right? We listen for language that helps us to understand that people are actually using these techniques in their everyday life. And so if someone uses language that sounds like they're blaming other people or they're blaming, some factor outside of themselves, they have an external locus of control, then we address it right away, right away.
So that listening for their change is part of your active listening. That whenever they're
That's right.
using words, that's being more
Mhm.
connecting as opposed to disconnecting.
We're connected. That's right. That's right.
And there's something that Zig Ziglar said that I have always thought was so powerful in looking at how everything we do is our choice. And he made the comment one time, he said, for 40 years, I chose to be fat, overweight. And he said, I say that I chose to be that because never did anybody stick anything in my mouth.
Mhm.
I was doing all of that myself.
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
And
mhm,
then it becomes a, oh, yeah, I see. And
mhm,
anytime we
mhm.
can see it, and you have certainly helped us to see a lot of changes and how that they can be implemented easily. It may be a little distressing initially, but it leads to peace.
Yes,
And
yes, it
thank
does
you
lead.
very, very much. We're going to go ahead and close out today. And thank all of you that watching this previous or eventually will be watching this later on. And those that are here, stay and we'll chat for a while. In the meantime, many blessings and good mental health.